Chapter 1. My family asked me to move my wedding so my sister could shine, and I said yes without arguing. Months later, while her perfect ceremony unfolded under spotlights in Chicago, I was standing in a quiet courtyard in Provence, marrying the man I loved, sipping wine they did not realize belonged to me, watching the attention slowly drift away from everything they thought they controlled. My name is Claire, and this is the story of what happens when the quiet one stops explaining. I sat at the long dining table that my parents had owned for as long as I could remember, the polished wood, reflecting the soft winter light coming in from the wide windows, facing the quiet streets of Lakeview Ridge, a quiet pocket of the North Shore outside Chicago. It was late December of 2024, the kind of afternoon that feels suspended between holidays, when time slows and conversations feel heavier than usual. I had driven up after work still wearing my coat when my mother asked me to sit. She said it gently, the way she always did when she wanted everyone to feel calm and reasonable. My name is Claire Holloway. I was 38 years old at the time, and I had learned long ago how to listen without reacting. That skill had served me well in boardrooms and negotiations, and it had also kept me quiet at family tables like this one. My younger sister Lillian sat across from me. She was 34, radiant in that effortless way she had perfected since her early 20s. My father poured himself another cup of coffee, even though it was already past 3 in the afternoon. My mother folded her hands together, her posture straight, her expression composed. "We need to talk about the wedding schedule," my mother said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. I nodded. I had known something was coming the moment she texted earlier that week and asked if we could all meet. When my parents asked for family meetings, it was never casual. There was always a decision already made by the time we sat down. Lillian leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright. She had just returned from New York the night before, where she had been meeting with a public relations team about brand partnerships tied to her upcoming marriage. She talked about it often, how the timing of her wedding mattered for her visibility, how summer of 2025 would align perfectly with several media opportunities. I had listened to those conversations with the same neutral interest I brought to most things involving her life. My father cleared his throat. He looked at me, then at my mother, then back at me again. "We have decided that the family needs to focus its full attention and resources on Lillian's wedding next summer," he said. "It is an important moment for her career and public profile, and it makes sense for all of us to be fully present." My mother picked up seamlessly where he left off. "Between the travel, the events, the guest list, and the expectations, it would be best if there were no competing dates. It would be simpler for everyone." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, not panic, not anger, just recognition. I waited. Experience had taught me that the part that concerned me usually came a few seconds later. "We were hoping," my mother continued, "that you might consider moving your wedding to later in the year. Maybe November. You have always been flexible and you do not really need the peak season the way Lillian does." Lillian smiled at me, not unkindly. She reached for her water glass as if this were all a matter of scheduling software and calendars, nothing personal at all. "It would really help," she said. "Everything is about momentum right now. Exposure matters." No one raised their voice. No one accused me of anything. The language was smooth, careful, reasonable. I noticed that no one asked how long I had been planning my own wedding or how many deposits were already paid, or whether November meant anything to me. The assumption seemed to be that if I was asked politely, I would naturally comply. I have always been the reasonable one. My mother leaned back slightly and offered me a soft smile. "You understand," she said. "You always do." That sentence landed exactly where it always had, somewhere between my ribs. You understand. It was a compliment and a command at the same time. It meant that I was expected to absorb inconvenience without complaint, to adjust quietly so that the rest of the system could function smoothly. My father tapped the side of his mug. "This is just logistics," he added. "There is no emotional component here. We are talking about dates and availability, not priorities." I looked at him, then really looked at him, and wondered how many times he had said something similar over the years. When I moved my graduation dinner so it would not conflict with Lillian internship send-off, when I postponed my engagement party because her schedule was hectic, when my promotion announcement was quietly folded into a holiday gathering so it would not distract from her achievements. As they spoke, my mind drifted backward through a series of moments that had once felt isolated but now lined up with uncomfortable clarity. The year I was accepted into a competitive graduate program and was told we would celebrate later because Lillian had a photo shoot that weekend. The time I bought my first home and was congratulated quickly before the conversation turned back to her social calendar. Each moment had been small, none of them had felt worth arguing over. Together, they formed a pattern. I realized something else in that moment. No one at the table was watching my face closely. There was no concern about how I might be taking this news. They were waiting for my agreement, not my reaction. I heard myself speak, my voice steady. If that is what makes the most sense, I can move my date. My mother exhaled relief, flickering across her face. I knew you would be fine with it, she said. You are always so understanding. My father nodded, already reaching for his phone. Good, that settles it then. Lillian smiled, wider gratitude mixed with something else I could not quite name. She thanked me, and I told her it was no problem. The words came out automatically polished from years of practice. Inside, something shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no surge of anger, no impulse to stand up or leave. Instead, there was a quiet, almost surgical clarity. I understood then that this was not about my wedding date or even about Lillian. It was about the role I had been assigned a long time ago. I was the one who made things easier, the one whose milestones could be moved without consequence, the one who would never force a choice. For the first time, I saw that this was not a temporary inconvenience or an oversight. It was a structure. And I had been holding it up. As the conversation drifted on to catering options and guest accommodations for Lillian event, I sat back and listened. My parents talked about travel logistics. Lillian scrolled through images on her phone. No one circled back to me. No one asked if I was all right. That was the moment that stayed with me long after I drove home that evening. Not the request itself, but the absence that followed it. The empty space where concern should have been. When I finally spoke again, it was only to say goodbye. On the drive back toward the city, the streets dark and quiet, I felt strangely calm. I had agreed to move my wedding. I had not argued or protested. On the surface, nothing had changed. But somewhere between the highway exit and my apartment door, I made a private decision. I would not explain myself anymore. Not tonight, not later, not when questions eventually came. I would do what I had always done outwardly, and inwardly I would begin doing something very different. Chapter 2, Different, looked like silence with intent. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was the flat color of winter's steel, and the city felt like it was holding its breath. I made coffee, opened my laptop at the small kitchen table in my apartment in Lincoln Park, and stared at my calendar. June. The date I had circled for months. The venue deposit. The florist quote. The guest list I had built carefully, not because I wanted spectacle, but because I wanted one day that belonged to me. I closed the tab. I did not call my mother to argue. I did not text Lillian to tell her how unfair it was. I did not even bring it up to my fiancé Evan until later that evening, when he walked in with his scarf half untied and snow melting on his shoulders. He set his bag down and kissed my cheek. "You look quiet," he said. I kept my voice even. "My parents want me to move our date," I said. He blinked once. "Why?" "Because Lillian wedding is next summer, and it is better for her career," I said. Evan frowned, the kind of frown that meant he was trying to choose his words carefully. "They said that out loud." I nodded. He took a slow breath, then sat across from me. "Are you okay?" The question landed hard because it was so simple. Are you okay? 4 words my family had not offered me once. I stared at the steam rising from my mug. "I do not know yet," I said honestly. "But I know I am not doing what I used to do." Evan reached for my hand. "What did you used to do?" I could have answered with one sentence. I used to explain. I used to negotiate my worth. I used to make everything easier. Instead, I found myself thinking about how long I had been trained for that role. In 2010, when I was 24, I graduated from the University of Illinois and took my first job downtown at a civil engineering firm that specialized in municipal infrastructure. It was not glamorous work. It was bridges, water systems, energy grids, the bones of a city that nobody noticed until something broke. I loved it anyway. I loved the quiet logic, the way good design made people safer without them ever knowing my name. My mother called my job practical. My father called it stable. Lillian called it cute. That was the year my parents drove down for my graduation, stayed for the ceremony, took photos, and then cut the dinner short because Lillian had an audition for a reality show segment that she was convinced would change everything. My mother squeezed my arm in the restaurant parking lot and said, "You understand, right? This is a big opportunity for your sister." I had smiled and said, "Of course." By 2012, Lillian had learned how to be visible. She started a blog, then a lifestyle channel, then a social feed that grew fast enough for my parents to start mentioning her name with a kind of pride that made the air in the room feel different. My mother began watching how Lillian dressed, how she spoke, how she posed for photos. My father suddenly had opinions about branding. When I got accepted into a graduate program in 2013, a top program focused on sustainable systems, I called my parents, with the news from my office stairwell, because I did not want my coworkers to hear me sound too excited. My mother was happy in her way, but her excitement had a ceiling. "That is wonderful," she said. "We will celebrate soon. This weekend is not great, though your sister is flying in for a shoot." I hung up, went back to my desk, and finished my work like nothing had happened. In 2014, I started consulting part-time, and the work pulled me into a world that did not post on social media. Private clients, discreet contracts, estates outside Aspen and Palm Beach, people with money who wanted sustainable systems because they could afford to care about sustainability. They did not want press. They wanted privacy, reliability, and results. That was when I realized that invisibility could be an advantage. If you are not a headline, you are not a target. I began building a network the way you build a foundation, quietly, carefully, with materials chosen for strength, not for shine. I met people through referrals. I signed non-disclosure agreements as casually as other people signed restaurant tabs. I learned to read rooms without speaking much. I learned who liked to feel important and who actually was. I learned that the loudest person in the room was rarely the one with power. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Lillian. Not because I was hiding, but because they never asked in a way that made space for a real answer. When I tried once, my mother smiled politely and said, "That sounds like good, steady work. I am glad you are comfortable." Comfortable. As if that was the highest thing I could be. In 2016, Lillian got engaged to a man she met at a gala. My parents threw her an engagement party in their backyard with catered champagne and a photographer. They invited people I had never met, people who talked about brands and visibility and the right kind of wedding venue. Lillian floated through it like it was her natural environment. I arrived after driving up from the city, still in work clothes. My mother looked me over and whispered that my blouse was fine, but maybe a little plain for photos. Then she pointed me toward the kitchen to help set out appetizers. I stood there cutting fruit, listening to Lillian laugh in the next room, and a strange thought came to me. If I disappeared, would anyone notice right away? That thought scared me enough that I pushed it down. In 2018, I bought my first condo. It was a small place, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I invited my parents and Lillian over for dinner. I cooked. I cleaned. I put fresh flowers on the table because I wanted it to feel like a celebration. My father walked through the living room, nodded, and said, "Nice. Sensible choice." My mother asked what the neighborhood was like, then spent 20 minutes talking about a new skincare line Lillian was partnering with. Lillian took a photo of my kitchen backsplash and posted it with a caption about cozy spaces. After they left, I stood in the doorway and stared at the spot where my mother had been sitting. I realized I could not remember a single question she had asked me about my life that night. Not one. Evan listened as I told him these things, my voice steady, my hands wrapped around my mug. He did not interrupt. His eyes stayed on my face, not on his phone, not on the floor. When I finished, he said quietly, "They have been using your silence as permission." The word permission hit like a bell. "Yes," I said. "They have." Evan leaned back. "So what does different look like for you?" I thought about that all night. Not in a dramatic way. More like solving a problem you have avoided for years. If you want a system to stop harming you, you do not beg the system to love you. You change your relationship to it. In 2020, when the world shut down, Lillian posted through it like her life depended on it. She filmed herself baking, organizing, doing live updates about resilience. My parents watched her content at the dinner table and talked about how brave she was. Meanwhile, I was juggling contracts, redesigning energy plans for estates that suddenly wanted to be self-sufficient. I was working 14-hour days, quiet work that kept people safe and comfortable, work no one would ever clap for. And yet, it was in those years that I grew the most. I gained clients who trusted me because I delivered. I developed a reputation that traveled without my name attached to it in public. I learned how to move through high-powered spaces and leave no fingerprints. My family could not interfere because they did not understand. They could not ask for favors they did not know I could give. They could not borrow status from a life they could not picture. That was the truth, the one I had never said out loud. Their blindness had protected me. The following weekend, I drove back to Lakeview Ridge for a holiday brunch because it was expected. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Lillian was there talking excitedly about venues and photographers. My mother showed me a mood board on her tablet, images of floral arches and table settings. "What do you think, Claire?" My mother asked, her tone bright. She asked it the way you ask someone to approve a paint color, not the way you ask someone to share a feeling. "It is lovely," I said. Lillian glanced at me. "You are really okay moving your date, right?" She smiled, but her eyes searched mine for something, maybe guilt, maybe reassurance. I met her gaze and kept my face calm. "I already said yes," I replied. "It is handled." My mother relaxed instantly as if I had just signed a form. "Good," she said. "I knew you would be practical about it." Practical. Again. Always the word they used when they wanted to keep me in my place. As I watched them talk, my mother animated my father, nodding. Lillian, glowing. Something in me clicked into place. It was not rage, it was clarity. I could see the machinery of my family, how it ran on the assumption that I would absorb discomfort, so the rest of them could stay comfortable. I could see how Lillian did not even have to ask for what she got. The system delivered it to her automatically. And I could see something else. If a system is built on your silence, then choosing when to speak is power. I took my coat from the closet, kissed my mother's cheek, and told them I needed to get back to the city. My mother protested lightly, said I should stay longer, said we never see you enough. The words sounded affectionate, but they did not reach me. On the drive home, I kept both hands on the steering wheel, eyes steady on the road, and I felt the shape of my next steps forming not as revenge, not as a performance, but as a quiet plan. For the first time, I stopped thinking of my family as people who might change if I explained myself correctly. I started thinking of them as a system that only worked because I had been willing to play my part. Chapter 3. January of 2025 arrived with dirty snow piled against curbs and a kind of brightness that made everything feel exposed. I went back to Lakeview Ridge one more time because my mother said she needed to show me something. That was her phrasing when she wanted compliance to feel like collaboration. The house was warm when I stepped inside, smelling like citrus cleaner and coffee. My father was in the living room with his laptop open, reading something on the screen like it was urgent. My mother waved me toward the dining table, the same table where they had asked me to move my wedding date, as if they were rescheduling a dentist appointment. Lillian was already there, scrolling through a folder of photos on her phone, her engagement ring catching the light every time she moved her hand. My mother tapped her tablet and turned it so I could see. It was a digital mood board full of white flowers, gold accents, a ballroom ceiling lit like a starfield. "Isn't it stunning?" she said. "It is," I replied. My father did not look up. "We got the contract for the venue finalized," he said. "There are deadlines, so we need everyone on the same page." Lillian smiled like the page had always been hers. "The photographer wants to do an engagement shoot in March, and the magazine contact said summer weddings photograph better. It just makes sense." I watched them talk. My mother asked Lillian about bridesmaid dresses. My father mentioned hotel blocks. No one spoke about my wedding except as an obstacle that had been removed. Then my mother glanced at me, and her face softened the way it did when she wanted to sound kind. She reached across the table and patted my hand once briefly, like a nurse checking for a pulse. "You've been so quiet since we talked," she said. "I know you're disappointed, honey, but don't make this bigger than it has to be." It was a gentle sentence delivered gently, and it still felt like a slap. I kept my voice neutral. "I'm not making anything bigger." My father finally looked up. His eyes were calm, practical. "This is what I mean," he said. "The silent treatment. It doesn't help anyone. You're a grown woman, Claire. If you're upset, just say it." Lillian shifted in her seat, and I caught a flicker of relief in her expression. Not relief for me, relief that the narrative was staying intact. I was the one being emotional even while I was speaking calmly. I was the problem even while I was still. I stared at my father, and for a moment I saw the entire pattern in one clean line. They did not read my silence as composure. They read it as a tactic, and because they believed it was a tactic, they felt entitled to correct it. My mother leaned closer. "We love you," she said, "but you can't punish us for supporting your sister. You should be happy for her." There it was. Punish, as if my lack of enthusiasm was cruelty, as if my feelings were something I owed them to make their choices feel moral. I felt something settle inside me like a door clicking shut. Not anger, not despair, just certainty. "Evan and I are fine," I said. "I'm handling my plans." My mother exhaled, relieved again. "Good," she said, "because you have always been the stable one. You'll bounce back. Lillian needs this. You understand that." I nodded, because nodding kept the conversation from expanding. I stayed for 10 more minutes, long enough to be polite, long enough to let them believe they had smoothed things over. Then I stood, put on my coat, and said I needed to get back to the city. In the car, my hands gripped the steering wheel harder than usual. The snow along the road was crusted and gray. My phone buzzed once with a text from Lillian. "We are okay, right? I don't want this to be weird." I read it at a red light and did not answer. Not because I wanted her to worry. Because I finally understood that explaining myself would not change the structure. Explaining would only feed it. That night, Evan found me in the kitchen looking at my laptop. "What did they say?" he asked. I looked up. My voice surprised me with how steady it was. "They think I'm giving them the silent treatment." He frowned. "You're not." "I know," I said. "But they need me to be the unreasonable one. Otherwise, they have to look at what they're doing." Evan sat down beside me. "So what happens now?" I opened a folder on my laptop. Inside were emails, contracts, payment confirmations. Things I had kept organized because organization was how I calmed myself. I clicked on the email thread with our Chicago venue. "I cancel," I said. Evan studied my face. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "If I just move the date, they will still own it. They will still believe they can rearrange my life whenever it suits them." He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you want me to do it?" "No," I said. "I need to do it." The next morning, I called the venue coordinator during a break between meetings. Her voice was professional and cheerful. "Hi, Claire," she said. "How can I help you today?" I swallowed once. "I need to cancel my reservation." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask why?" "Personal reasons," I said. She did not press. She explained the cancellation policy. The deposit was non-refundable. The number landed in my stomach like a weight money I had saved and paid because I believed in that date. I understand, I said. Please send the paperwork. When I hung up, I sat very still and let the feeling move through me. Loss, relief, a thin line of grief. Then, underneath it all, something lighter, space. That afternoon, I met with Mark Feldman in his downtown office, a quiet suite above a bank building near LaSalle Street. Mark was in his 50s with the kind of calm that comes from handling other people's stress for a living. He greeted me with a firm handshake and offered coffee I did not take. "How are we feeling today?" he asked. "Clear," I said. He opened a file and slid a document across the desk. "Your limited liability company is active. The trust documents are ready for signature. The escrow timeline is on track. If we keep to the schedule, closing will be smooth." The words sounded clinical, and that was exactly what I needed. Smooth, on track, active. A world where things happened because you did the work, not because someone decided you mattered. Mark glanced at me. "You mentioned family dynamics before. I want to confirm no one in your family is to be involved. No disclosures, no shared access. Correct?" "Correct," I said. He nodded once. "Good. Privacy is a form of protection." When I left his office, the wind off the river was sharp enough to make my eyes water. I walked a few blocks without looking at my phone. My life was splitting into two timelines. The one my family thought I was living, where I was quietly disappointed and still waiting for permission to have my moment. And the one I was actually building, where permission was no longer part of the equation. My mother called that evening. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. She texted right after. "Please don't shut us out. We are worried about you." Worried? Now? After the decision was made, after my feelings had been labeled punishment, after my silence had been scolded. Worry arrived only when my compliance looked uncertain. Evan came into the room and saw my face. "You don't have to answer," he said. "I know," I replied. I stared at the dark window, at my own reflection faintly visible in the glass. I thought about Lakeview Ridge, about that dining table, about the way my mother had patted my hand like I was a child having a tantrum. I thought about Mark saying privacy was protection. I thought about how my family would interpret my next move no matter what I did, so I chose the move they could not interpret. I booked a flight. I sent 2 emails. I placed one more call, not to my parents, not to Lillian, but to a service that could help pack and ship a few personal things quietly without drama. Then I did what I had always done on the outside. I kept my voice soft. I kept my schedule intact. I showed up to work. I smiled when I needed to. And without announcing it to anyone, I began stepping out of the role my family had written for me. By the time February came, the plans were in motion, the legal pieces moving forward in clean lines, the kind that did not require anyone else's approval. I did not tell my parents where I was going. I did not tell Lillian what I was doing. I simply stopped giving them access to the parts of my life they did not deserve to rearrange. Chapter 4. I did not tell my family when the date was set. By early June of 2025, the arrangements were complete, and the shape of my life had changed so quietly that even I sometimes forgot how deliberate it had been. I woke up in the south of France to the sound of cicadas and light moving through old stone walls. The air smelled like lavender and dust, and something faintly sweet that I later learned came from the vines warming in the sun. Our wedding day arrived without spectacle. There was no countdown, no public itinerary, no vendors waiting for approval from a committee. Evan stood beside me in a small courtyard that had once been part of a working estate, his hand steady in mine. He wore a simple suit, nothing tailored for cameras. I wore a dress chosen because it let me breathe easily. No one was live posting, no one was staging moments. Aunt Loretta adjusted a chair and stepped back, her eyes soft. "This is exactly right for you," she whispered. Naomi hovered nearby, phone in hand, not as a tool, but as an extension of habit. She had asked me earlier if it was okay to record anything at all. "Only if you forget about it," I had said. She smiled. "I think I can manage that." My grandmother Evelyn sat in the front row wrapped in a light shawl, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had traveled farther than anyone else to be there, and when I bent down to kiss her cheek, she held my face gently between her palms. "You built this," she said. "I am proud of you." That was all. At the same hour, 7 time zones away, Chicago was dressed for a performance. Lillian Wedding filled the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel that had been featured in more than one bridal magazine. White flowers spilled from tall arrangements. Lighting technicians adjusted their angles. A planner moved briskly between stations with a headset and a clipboard, her voice crisp. 5 minutes until doors open, she said. Make sure the champagne wall is aligned. My parents stood near the entrance, my mother smoothing her dress, my father checking his watch. Guests gathered, phones already out. The event had been teased for weeks online, framed as a moment, a brand milestone, a culmination. Lillian stood in a private room upstairs, surrounded by mirrors and people whose job it was to tell her she looked perfect. "This is it," she said, her voice bright. "This is the day." Back in Provence, there was no announcement. We walked into the courtyard together, Evan and I, the sound of our footsteps soft against stone. The officiant spoke quietly. The words mattered, but not because they would be shared. They mattered because we heard them. Naomi sat on the edge of her chair, smiling occasionally, lifting her phone without thinking, then lowering it again. Once she angled it toward the table where the wine had been set out. The bottles were simple, unlabeled, except for a small crest embossed in the glass. She turned to me. "This is incredible," she said softly. "Where did you find it?" I shrugged. "It came with the place." She laughed under her breath. "Of course it did." In Chicago, the ceremony began on cue. Music swelled, guests rose, phones tilted upward. Lillian stepped into view, radiant, practiced, moving exactly as she had rehearsed. Applause filled the room. A planner whispered instructions into her headset. As vows were exchanged, Naomi posted a short clip from the courtyard without thinking much about it. Just light on stone, a table set for a few people, the sound of laughter drifting through the frame. She tagged no one. She added no caption. Within minutes, comments appeared. "Where is this? This looks unreal. Is this private?" Someone shared it. Then someone else. By the time Evan and I kissed, the clip had moved beyond Naomi's circle. The contrast did the work. Quiet against spectacle, intimacy against production. In Chicago, the ceremony ended and the reception began. Lillian smiled for cameras posed with friends moved from table to table. A bridesmaid leaned in and whispered something. "Your cousin just posted something," she said. "People are asking questions." Lillian waved it off. "Let them. Today is about us." But her phone kept lighting up. Back in Provence, I did not see any of it. We sat down to dinner as the sun dipped lower, the air cooling. Someone poured the wine. Aunt Loretta raised her glass. "To choosing your own life," she said. "To not having to explain it," Evan added. We laughed, the sound easy. In Chicago, the sommelier began pouring from the same distributor shipment selected weeks earlier by the planner for its exclusivity. A guest swirled the wine, curious. "This is interesting," he said. "I had something like this in France last year." Another guest leaned over. "Where is it from?" The planner frowned slightly and checked her notes. She stepped aside, pulled up an email confirmation from the distributor, and read the line she had skimmed before. "Estate bottled. Limited allocation. Private provenance." She scrolled. The estate name was unfamiliar, but the location caught her eye. Provence. Someone else had already connected the dots. Screens lit up again. Messages flew. A guest asked casually where the wine came from. Lillian overheard. "What wine?" she asked. The planner hesitated. "It is from a private estate." "Which one?" The planner showed her the screen. For the first time that day, Lillian's expression shifted. Not panic, confusion. Then something sharper. My mother noticed. "What is it?" "Nothing," Lillian said quickly. "Just logistics." But the room had changed. Conversations drifted. Phones buzzed. Someone mentioned seeing a video online. Someone else mentioned Provence. My father stood stiffly scanning the room, trying to understand how the narrative had slipped out of his hands. At our table, my grandmother took a sip of wine and smiled. "This is very good," she said. "You have good taste." Evan squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I was more than okay. I was present. Later, Naomi's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then at me. "People are asking if this is your wedding," she said carefully. I met her eyes. "It is." She smiled slowly. "They are very interested." "Let them be," I said. In Chicago, interest had turned into distraction. Lillian laughed a little too loudly. My mother leaned close, whispering questions that had no answers. My father checked his phone again, his jaw tight. No one said my name out loud. They did not need to. The absence was loud enough. As the evening in Provence stretched on, the air filled with conversation that did not circle back to me. People talked about travel, about work, about nothing at all. Evan and I slipped away for a moment, standing at the edge of the courtyard, the sound of voices behind us fading. "I do not feel like I am missing anything," he said. "I know," I replied. We watched the sky darken, the first stars appearing. I did not check my phone. I did not wonder how they were reacting. I did not need to see it to understand it. The shift had already happened. For the first time, my family was not watching me. They were reacting to a story they no longer controlled, and for the first time that story did not require my participation at all. I stayed where I was with my hand in Evan, with the sound of laughter nearby, and I let the rest of the noise belong to someone else. Chapter 5. The quiet did not end when the celebration did. In the weeks after the wedding, life settled into a slower rhythm. Morning light through unfamiliar windows. Coffee shared without schedules. Evenings where time stretched instead of pressed. I returned to Chicago briefly to close a few loose ends, and the city felt the same, loud and busy, but I moved through it differently, like someone who had already stepped out of a line and could now watch it from the side. The first message from my mother came 5 days after I landed. "We have been trying to reach you. Please let us know you are safe." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Safe. Not happy. Not proud. Safe. I replied with one sentence. "I am fine." Her response came quickly. "Can we talk?" I did not answer right away. I was learning the difference between urgency and entitlement, and I did not want to confuse the two. When I finally agreed to a call, it was on a Tuesday afternoon, scheduled like a meeting. Evan was at work. The apartment was quiet. My mother's voice sounded careful, as if she were choosing each word from a list she had rehearsed. "We just want to understand what is happening," she said. "There has been a lot of confusion." My father joined the call a few seconds later. He did not greet me. He cleared his throat. "There are some things we need clarity on," he said, "practical matters." I waited. There were questions about where I was living now, questions about property, questions about finances that had never interested them before. My father asked whether I had set up any kind of trust. My mother asked if everything had been handled responsibly. Lillian stayed quiet at first, then spoke up. "People keep asking me things I do not know how to answer," she said. "It has been uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Not hurt. Not sorry. I listened, calm, detached, hearing the shape of their concern. It was not about me. It was about uncertainty. About access they were no longer sure they had. At one point, my mother softened her tone. "If we made you feel overlooked," she said, "that was never our intention." I noticed what she did not say. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask how I felt. She framed it as an accident, a misunderstanding, something without ownership. I said quietly, "I do not need explanations." There was a pause. My father spoke again. "We are your family, Claire. We deserve to be involved. The word deserve echoed in my chest, not with anger, but with clarity. I replied, I am not shutting you out. I am just not reorganizing my life anymore. Silence followed. I imagined them looking at one another, trying to place that sentence inside their existing framework. My mother finally said, "We just want to know where we stand." That was the question they had never asked before, and the answer was simpler than they expected. I ended the call politely. No raised voices, no dramatic statements, just an ending. Afterward, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel the weight of it. There was grief there, real grief, not for the relationship I had, but for the one I had hoped might exist if I tried hard enough. Letting go of that hope was heavier than any argument would have been. Later that evening, Aunt Loretta called. She had always been the quiet outlier in the family, the one who had left early, who had been spoken about in lowered voices after her divorce. Growing up, I had absorbed the lesson without anyone teaching it directly. Leaving the system came at a cost. I told her everything, not defensively, not to be understood, just to be heard. She laughed softly when I finished. I remember the moment I stopped explaining too. She said, "I thought it would feel like failure. It felt like relief." "How did you know it was the right choice?" I asked. She did not hesitate. "When I realized the people asking for access were never going to take responsibility for what they did with it." That sentence stayed with me. A few days later, Naomi visited. She kicked off her shoes at the door and curled up on the couch phone face down for once. "It is weird," she said. "Ever since your wedding, I feel lighter." "Why?" I asked. "Because I'm not trying to prove anything anymore," she said. "Watching you made me realize how much energy I spend performing. I do not want to do that forever." She smiled at me, tentative, hopeful. I saw myself in her years ago, still thinking the answer was to explain better, to earn understanding. My grandmother Evelyn called the next morning. Her voice was thin but steady. "I've been thinking about you," she said. I smiled. "Always." "You are a builder," she continued. "Not everyone is. Builders do not always get applause, but they leave things standing." No one had ever described me that way before. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. "Thank you," I said. After the calls ended and the days passed, I noticed something else changing. The messages from my parents slowed. When they came, they were shorter, less demanding, more cautious. Lillian sent one message late at night. "I did not realize how much you were carrying. I am sorry if I took that for granted. I read it twice. There was no request attached, no question about what came next, just a sentence." I did not reply immediately. I was learning that responding was a choice, not an obligation. In the quiet of those weeks, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Could I forgive them? The answer surprised me. Yes. But forgiveness did not look like reopening the door and stepping back into the same role. It did not look like offering access to a life they had repeatedly rearranged for their comfort. It looked like releasing the expectation that they would become different people if I waited long enough. One afternoon, I wrote an email to my parents. It was short. "I love you. I am building a life that works for me. I am not available for discussions about decisions I have already made. I did not send explanations. I did not ask for approval. I pressed send and closed my laptop." The response came the next day. "We understand." I did not know if they did. I did not need them to. On a warm evening, not long after Evan and I sat on the balcony, the city humming below us. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that makes everything feel possible without demanding that you prove it. "You seem settled," he said. I thought about the past year, about the table in Lakeview Ridge, about the silence that had once felt like weakness, about how carefully I had stepped out of a role that no longer fit. I said, for the first time." He smiled and clinked his glass against mine. We sat there without talking, comfortable in the space we had created, not because it impressed anyone, but because it belonged to us. As the evening cooled, I thought about boundaries, how they are not walls meant to punish others, but doors meant to protect what is inside, how choosing when to open them is an act of respect, not rejection. if you have ever found yourself shrinking to keep the peace or explaining your choices to people who only hear what benefits them. I wonder what would happen if you stopped rearranging your life to be more acceptable. What might you build if you chose when and how to give access, and what would it feel like to finally let that choice be yours?